Grandparents gave me a trip to Rome, but my parents demanded I give it to my sister. She wrecked the cab on the way to the airport, so I took back the ticket and went anyway. Hey, so I, 18 female, was recently given an international trip to Rome and a check to cover my expenses there by my paternal grandparents on my birthday as a gift. They handed me an envelope with the flight ticket contained within it, and the very next day, my parents started manipulating me to give it up to my sister. My older sister, June, 21 female, is the golden child of the family, in case you guys haven't figured it out by now. My parents started telling me that June is an architecture major, so a trip to Rome could be just what she needed during her vacation to improve her understanding and get to see better architectural designs in person. I tried to argue with them, saying that I planned on majoring in literature, so the trip to Rome was pretty important for me as well. June already had a chance on her 18th birthday, but she had rejected an international trip when my grandparents had offered it and said that she would rather just have the money that it would cost. So now it was my turn, and I was not giving it up for her. Besides, from what I know, the airline that I was flying with doesn't even offer an option to transfer your flight tickets from one person to another unless in very dire circumstances. But they told me not to worry about that. They just needed the ticket, and then they would figure out a way ahead on their own. This argument carried on for several days after my birthday, and it's been 2 weeks since my birthday, so eventually, I just gave in and told them that they were free to do whatever they wanted. It was not because I wanted to give up the international trip. I was actually really looking forward to it, but it didn't seem worth it to keep fighting with them, and I knew that they would not give up until I agreed to their terms, and they had pretty much started emotionally blackmailing me, bringing up everything that they had done for me, and in return, they were only asking me for a little favor. I thought it was really unfair of them, and initially I argued with them, but a couple of days back they made a remark out of frustration, saying that they did not want the trip to go to waste, and I found that very hurtful. They tried to backpedal pretty quickly, but they had already said it. So apparently they believed that if I went on the trip it would be wasted, but if June did, it would mean something. My parents tried to make it seem like they had only made this statement because June had already graduated, and a trip to Rome would look good on her resume. I don't understand how, and whereas I would always have a lot of time in the future to go on such trips, unlike June, who would have to start working in a couple of months. So I decided to give up the ticket and let them have at it. I just didn't want the drama of dealing with the same arguments over and over again. At least I would still have the check. Besides, I was kind of used to this kind of treatment right from when I was a kid, so I wasn't surprised. I also really did not think that the tickets were transferable according to the airline guidelines that I had gone through, so I didn't think that they would be able to do much, but I guess they had figured out a way to bypass those rules, and that's why, when I was supposed to leave for the airport yesterday, June ended up taking my boarding pass and was on her way to the airport when we received a phone call from the cops saying that there had been an accident involving June, and they had to bail her out now. Apparently, June had tried to take control of the steering wheel while the cab driver was driving to guide him because she didn't think he was taking the right route to the airport, and out of fear of getting delayed, she made that stupid little move. So, of course, they ended up losing control of the car and crashed into a tree. June was relatively unscathed, apart from a few scratches here and there, but the cab driver was seriously hurt because it was his side of the car that had hit the tree and suffered the worst impact. He has pressed charges against June for causing that accident, so now my parents have to dip into their life savings to bail her out if they want to come to a settlement with the cab driver and prevent this from going to trial. When I heard about this, I couldn't control myself, and the words just came out. I ended up saying that this was karma for my parents forcing me to give up my ticket and trip to Rome. This happened yesterday. They had just explained the entire situation to me and were leaving to go see June. And as soon as I said those words, I regretted it instantly, because they looked shocked and said that this was not something that I should be joking about. I tried to take it back, but they said that words had meaning, and once I had said it, I couldn't just take it back and expect things to be fine. Now they knew that I was very selfish, and that's why I had said this about my sister getting into an accident. That pissed me off because I thought it was really hypocritical of them to say such things, especially when they themselves had said that they didn't want the trip to go to waste, since that's what they believed would have happened if I went on it. I brought that up, but they told me that they were not even going to dignify that with a response after the remark that I had made, and then left to go see June at the hospital. At that point, I was really pissed off. So as a spur-of-the-moment decision, I decided to get a cab and head to June as well, because it suddenly occurred to me that I was throwing away this trip for no reason, because no matter what I did, my family would never value me or appreciate me. Might as well have them hate me and live my life the way I want. I quickly packed a small bag with my essentials and some clothes. Then I got my ride, followed them in the cab, and once we were at the hospital, my parents and I almost showed up within minutes of each other on the floor where the cab driver was. And June was still talking to the cops and trying to explain how none of this was her fault, even though it totally was. But I was not there to talk to her. I went up to her and asked her if she still had the boarding pass, and she looked very confused and disoriented, so I just grabbed her purse and started looking through it myself. When I found the boarding pass, I just grabbed it and made a run for it back to the cab, leaving everybody confused. Then I headed to the airport, and thankfully I was able to make it just in the nick of time. I boarded my flight and then was off to Rome. I didn't check my phone for any calls and messages until I landed here, and only a couple of hours ago did I find out exactly how pissed my family is at me. My parents obviously think that I had been extremely insensitive because June had just been in a terrible accident that she herself had caused, but they seemed to gloss over that fact every time, and all I cared about was my trip. And June is pissed because she thinks that I stole this opportunity from her, even though it was she who stole this from me in the first place. If anything, I'm just reclaiming what was mine and had been stupid enough to give it away. Anyway, the general consensus is that what I did was not the right thing to do, so I need to apologize to them, but I don't know if I really should. June also sent me a message saying that my parents were going to have to depend on their savings to come to a settlement with the driver, and I knew that my family's financial condition was not that great. So instead of frolicking in Rome, I could have saved the money and handed my parents the check that was given to me on my birthday, but I was just being plain selfish. So am I the asshole for taking off to Rome after my sister got into an accident? Hi, so there are a lot of questions that people have, and I'll answer them so it's easier for you guys to understand the situation. First and foremost, what was up with the boarding pass? Well, I really don't think that my parents or June were able to figure out a way to bypass the rules about the transfer of tickets from one person to another. I think her plan was to just get to the airport and wing it or something, because if they had managed to be able to do something about it, I wouldn't have been able to board with my passport since they would have required June. So I think they didn't even have a plan in the first place, which turned out to be lucky for me. Now, why did I continue to live with my family if they have always treated me badly? Why didn't I just go and live with my grandparents or literally anybody else? Well, you need to understand that this is the kind of treatment that I have been used to ever since I was a child. I'm not saying that it makes it fine all of a sudden, but my parents' preference for my sister used to make me feel like I needed to do better to win them over, not that they should have treated me better in any case. It was a strange and self-sacrificial way of thinking. I can't explain it, but that's just what I used to believe. So I spent the past 18 years of my life trying to be the best daughter to them so they would finally like me. And it led to a lot of disappointment, heartbreak, and frustration for me. But I never wanted to give up. I was a fool to believe that they would eventually come around since they were still my parents. But that's just how a child's mind works. Also, my grandparents don't live here. They live way outside of the city, away from everything that I have ever known. I didn't want to change my lifestyle, even though it had occurred to me many times that I would be better off living with them. They also don't know how my parents treat me. I don't think anybody in my family does because we are pretty good at hiding it when we are amongst people. Anyway, that's why I did not ever consider leaving my family behind, but I think I will do that because I'm an adult now. I don't think that I need to please anybody anymore. Coming to my relationship with June, all I can say is we have never been particularly close. I don't hate her, and neither does she have anything against me. We just don't get along, and that's it. As for my family's financial condition, we are not really rich. In fact, I would say that we are at the lower end of the spectrum since my mom is a nurse and my dad is a high school football coach. They rely on my grandparents for money quite often. I don't know how they're going to tackle this situation, though, since if they want money from my grandparents, they are going to have to fess up to what they did. So that's how it is with my family. A lot of you guys were asking me why June was sitting in the passenger seat of the cab anyway, and I really don't have an answer for that. It's just out of habit, I guess. Because even when we, as a family, used to go on road trips and stuff, she would always sit in the passenger seat. That's her spot, I guess. But yeah, she always sits in the passenger seat, and I think it might be because she's a bit of a control freak. I mean, she literally grabbed the steering wheel of the car because she thought a cab driver wouldn't know the right way to the airport and would drive her right into traffic. She thought she knew better than him, which is what caused the accident. So you can imagine the degree to which she needs to be in control. She even left for the airport almost 5 hours before the flight was supposed to take off. Make of that what you will. Update 1. Hey, so I thought about it for a couple of days, and I decided to just let loose and enjoy my trip because it's unlikely that I'll get an opportunity like this for the next couple of years after I start college. I don't need to worry about my parents or back home. They're all adults, and they can take care of this themselves. Besides, it's not my fault that they decided to stake a claim to what was not theirs originally and ended up getting hit back by karma. You were right. It was foolish of me to expect them to be grateful for my sacrifice. They would still always hate me, and I don't need to give up on my fun for that. Anyway, I'm currently living it up in Rome and having the time of my life. I spoke to my grandparents this morning as well, and I explained the entire situation to them, which is the first time I have spoken to anybody about what I go through at home. Not even my friends knew about the mistreatment that I used to face from my parents and how they were always partial to my sister, and talking about it felt really good. Most of you guys had this advice for me, that I should speak up about this and let somebody know. So I decided to tell my grandparents, and they were both shocked that this was going on for so long and I had never said a word about it. I explained to them that I always thought that if I kept my mouth shut and kept trying to be a good daughter to my parents, they would eventually be grateful for me and appreciate me, but it was more than clear to me now that this would never happen. They told me that I had done the right thing and said that after I came back from my trip to Rome, I was supposed to go straight to them and nowhere else. They said that they were going to arrange for me to move out of my parents' house and start living with them instead. And when I told them that I would have to move out for college in the fall, they told me that I wouldn't have to worry about it because the college that I had picked was out of state, and they said that they were going to bear all the expenses for that. So I guess just one conversation with my grandparents was all that I needed to absolutely fix my life. Because now I don't even have to worry about where I'm going to live once I finally get back since I've pissed my parents off real bad, and I think it's unlikely that they will be welcoming me back with open arms. My parents had already made it clear to me in the beginning, when I had started applying to colleges, that they would not be able to pay for my tuition, even though they had done it for June. They actually used that as an excuse, saying that they had already covered the expenses for one daughter to go to college, but I would have to take care of myself on my own. And now, I don't even have to worry about that. But now, I will definitely be living a better life as compared to earlier. Update 2. Hi. So my trip came to an end a couple of days ago, and now I'm living with my grandparents. Just as they had instructed me to, I went over to their place as soon as I had landed here, and I was pretty surprised to see that they already had the guest room set up for me to stay, and all the things from my parents' house had been moved here. Once I came back and they welcomed me warmly, my grandparents told me that after my conversation with them, where I had told them everything, they had gone to confront my parents. They were supposed to meet anyway because my parents had called them up on the evening that the accident with June had taken place, and they had called them over so they could discuss what to do and how to go ahead because my parents really did not want to dip into their savings for the money for the settlement. And they definitely did not want this to go to trial because then June would be in real trouble because there was dash cam footage to prove that she had caused the accident. And an out-of-court settlement is the only way to go for them. But the cab driver was apparently demanding an incredibly high amount, and they needed my grandparents to help them out here. But when they met, my grandparents brought up the situation with me first and asked my parents if it was true that they had been treating me badly all my life, and had even asked me to give up my trip so June could go in my place. At first, they apparently tried to skirt around the question by saying that they were here to discuss the situation with June and how to get her out of trouble, and I was in Rome having the time of my life, so it seemed unnecessary to talk about these things. But my grandparents insisted on talking about me because they wanted to get to the bottom of this, and eventually my parents just snapped and said that it was true. But I had proved that this was exactly the kind of treatment that I deserved by abandoning my family in their time of trouble. Apparently, my parents had said that I had only shown up at the hospital to grab my flight tickets so I would be able to make it in time for my trip without caring about what June or even what they were going through. They said that I had always been jealous of June because she had been better than me at every single thing, and I couldn't stand it. So that was really not their fault. They claimed that they had never treated me unfairly, which was a huge lie. My parents said that I was just being entitled and spoiled, and they were no longer going to entertain it when I came back. That was all that my grandparents needed to hear to make up their minds about cutting off their only son. My grandparents and parents got into an argument over this, and my parents ended up telling them that they were free to leave and said that they didn't need their help anymore since they were actually supporting my selfish behavior. They also said that they didn't want me back, so if my grandparents wanted to take me with them, they were more than welcome to do that as well. So my grandparents eventually got people to pack all the things in my room and moved my stuff to their house so I could make myself comfortable. After my grandparents told me about whatever had happened with my parents, I ended up crying because it just hurt. I had always known that my parents couldn't care less about me, but they were all that I had known for the past 18 years, and my heart was broken. I literally pray that nobody else has to go through crap like this, but anyway, my grandparents were there for me all along, and I'm really very grateful for that. Anyway, now I'm not confused. I'm going to be living with them, and this is my home now. I'll definitely be going to college in a couple of months, but until then, my grandparents have promised to be there with me, and even when I'm off to college, they have said that I have nothing to worry about since they're going to cover all my expenses. I've had no contact with my parents or June after I came back, and I hadn't even checked the last couple of messages that they had sent me because I was trying to make the best of my trip. So I finally checked them today, since I thought I was in a better place mentally. And I'm so glad that I did not check these messages earlier because then I definitely would have had another mental breakdown. June's messages were all along the same lines. I'm selfish and entitled, and I'm spoiled, and she's glad that she won't have anything to do with me at this point on Earth because I don't deserve her company anyway. I think she got that a little bit twisted. I think she's the one who doesn't deserve my company, but whatever, it doesn't even matter to me. It's really my parents that hurt me more than anything else. But at this point, I don't even feel surprised at the things they say to me. My parents sent me a couple of messages saying that what I had done was incredibly heartless, and that they should have stopped me the second that I showed up at the hospital. But it was their failure that they had not managed to raise me right. And then I slipped through their hands even at the hospital when I made a run for it so I could go on the trip. My family was such a difficult situation. I did not respond to that message, sent I had been treated, even though my parents had always done everything in their power to make sure that I had a comfortable life. I guess my parents don't understand that having a comfortable life is very different from having a good childhood. They said that they sent me to school, fed me, clothed me, and I had a roof over my head at all times. There was really nothing more that I could have asked for, but in spite of all of that, I was still cribbing about how I was treated by my parents. They said that just because I was jealous of June, I couldn't make them out to be the villains because that was simply unfair, and then they said that they were right about calling me a waste because that's all I really was. I had wasted their time and energy for so many years, and now they were finally glad to be rid of me. That really got to me, and I almost cried about it, but I had promised myself after speaking to my grandparents that I was not going to let their harsh words get to me anymore because it's just not worth it. So I didn't cry, but I did block my parents so that they wouldn't be able to have any access to me anymore. Hopefully, I'm going to start my healing journey and get over this eventually because I really think that after all the trauma that they have caused me, I seriously need to move on and erase every trace of them from my brain completely if I want to live my best life. I don't know if that's actually possible, but it's worth a try. Update 3. So, the funniest and craziest thing happened today. It's been close to 2 weeks since I returned from my trip, and so far I have had absolutely no idea what's been going on with my parents in June. But I'm assuming that they are still struggling to come up with the money so they can have an out-of-court settlement with the cab driver because this afternoon, my parents showed up at my grandparents' house, and they were in a vengeful mood. Thankfully, they did not even acknowledge my existence when I opened the door and walked right past me to go to the living room and sit down with my grandparents. I had no idea what to do when I was lurking around the living room, but my grandparents told me to sit down with them. They knew that my parents would not be too happy about this decision of including me in the conversation, and I could see it on their faces. But if they were pissed about it, they did not say anything. Anyway, as soon as we were all seated, my grandparents asked them what they were there for. Since the last time that they had spoken to each other, my parents had made it very clear that they wanted nothing to do with them because they had been supporting my decisions. My parents said that they were still going to stick to that, but before they cut each other off entirely, they had some scores to settle, and then they brought out a document with a bunch of calculations on it and said that there was a huge amount of money that they had spent on raising me. And since my grandparents had so graciously taken over the duties of parents, they expected themselves to be absolved and said that they wanted all the money that they had spent on me so far to be paid to them by my grandparents now. They were the ones who were responsible for me. I was shocked that they were here to make such a ridiculous demand, and all I could do was just look at them because I had no words for how low this was. I could tell that this was just a way to make us all feel small because they were demanding almost $120,000. It was just crazy. But then, my grandparents said that they just needed a moment to themselves in private and left the room to discuss this between themselves. There was a very awkward silence because it was just me and my parents in the living room, and they refused to acknowledge me in any way whatsoever. They didn't even look at me, and I found it very awkward, but thankfully, after a couple of minutes, my grandparents were back. They took their seats. My grandpa tried to be as calm and polite as possible and said that it was true that they were claiming responsibility and they would gladly repay the amount that my parents had spent on me so far. I was about to interrupt because I thought it was very unfair that they were even asking for this kind of money since it was not something that they had done as a favor to me. They were my parents, and they were supposed to raise me. They had only done their duty, and even then, they had done the bare minimum, so they did not deserve even $1 out of my grandparents. But my grandparents told me not to interrupt, and then they went on to say that they would repay this amount, but only on one condition, that my parents repay all the money that they had borrowed from my grandparents over the years. And that had my parents absolutely stumped. I could see on their faces that they had been owned, and I thought it was very funny because they looked like deer caught in headlights. So I had to leave the room because I wanted to laugh so bad at them that I didn't come back down from my room until my parents had already left. When I asked my grandparents what had happened after they left the room, they told me that my parents had tried to argue their way out of this, but there was no way that they could do anything. So eventually, they just ended up cursing out all of us and left in a huff, which is just so typical of them. But anyway, I don't think they will be back anytime soon after this stunning humiliation. And even if they come back, I don't think it'll be a problem for anyone since my grandparents have proven that they are more than capable of handling them on their own. The fact that my father is their only son is not going to make them go soft on them, and I'm going to be off to college in a couple of months anyway. So I'm honestly just looking forward to that, and yeah, going on the trip to Rome was probably the best decision that I could have made.